Good day, everyone. This is Alvi Jane B. Tangaro, your third reporter for Chapter 5, which is Typical and Atypical Development Among Children. Today, I will be discussing with you the social learning theory of Albert Bandura. This presentation would be the continuation of sociocultural theory of Lev Vygotsky, presented by the second reporter. At the end of this chapter, you'll be able to identify typical and atypical milestones in the various stages of child development and differentiate typical and atypical development of children in various stages of their development. Social learning theory proposed by Albert Bandura emphasizes the importance of observing, modeling, and imitating the behaviors, attitudes, and emotional reactions of others. Social learning theory considers how both environmental and cognitive factors interact to influence human learning and behavior. What to know about social learning theory? First, people can learn through observation. Second, mental states are important to learning. And third, learning does not necessarily lead to behavior change. Who is Albert Bandura? Albert Bandura was born on December 4, 1925, a Canadian-American. Studied at University of British Columbia and University of Iowa. Famous for research on social learning theories. Famous for the quote, "Most learning is gained by people's perception and thinking about what they experience. They learn by copying the examples of others around them." Researcher responsible for social learning theory. Albert Bandura is considered the leading proponent of this theory. He found that people learn not only as a result of their own beliefs and expectations, but also by modeling or observing others, an idea that led to the development of modern social cognition theory. As I've said earlier, social learning theory proposed by Albert Bandura emphasizes the importance of observing, modeling, and imitating the behaviors, attitudes, and emotional reactions of others. Also, it considers how both environmental and cognitive factors interact to influence human learning and behavior. In social learning theory, Albert Bandura agrees with the behaviorist learning theories of classical conditioning and operant conditioning. However, he adds two important ideas. Meditating process occur between stimuli and responses, and behavior is learned from the environment through the process of observational learning. Observational learning. Children observe the people around them behaving in various ways. This is illustrated during the famous Bobo doll experiment. Individuals that are observed are called models. In society, children are surrounded by many influential models such as parents within the family, characters on children's TV, friends within their peer group, and teachers at school. These models provide examples of behavior to observe and imitate, masculine and feminine, pro and antisocial. So children pay attention to some of these people, what we call models, and encode their behavior. So if what they see, they will follow them. At a later time, they imitate the behavior they have observed. They may do this regardless of whether the behavior is gender appropriate or not. But there are a number of processes that make it more likely that a child will reproduce the behavior that its society deems appropriate for its gender. First, the child is more likely to attend to and imitate those people it perceives as similar to itself. Consequently, it is more likely to imitate behavior modeled by people of the same gender. Second, the people around the child will respond to the behavior it imitates with either reinforcement or punishment. If a child imitates a model's behavior and the consequences are rewarding, the child is likely to continue performing the behavior. Reinforcement can be external or internal and can be positive or negative. If a child wants approval from the parents or peers, this approval is an external reinforcement. But feeling happy about being approved of is an internal reinforcement. A child will behave in a way which it believes will earn approval because it desires approval. Positive or negative reinforcement will have little impact if the reinforcement offered external does not match with an individual's needs. Reinforcement can be positive or negative, but the important factor is that it will usually lead to a change in a person's behavior. Third, the child will also take into account of what happens to other people when deciding whether or not to copy someone's actions. A person learns by observing the consequences of another person's behavior. Sample, a younger sister observing an older sister being rewarded for a particular behavior is more likely to repeat that behavior herself. This is known as vicarious reinforcement. Identification. It occurs with another person, the model, and involves taking on or adopting observed behaviors, values, beliefs, and attitudes of the person with whom you are identifying. The term identification, as used by social learning theory, is similar to the Freudian term related to the Oedipus complex. For example, they both involve internalizing or adapting another person's behavior. However, during the Oedipus complex, the child can only identify with the same-sex parent, whereas with social learning theory, the person or the child or adult can potentially identify with any other person. Identification is different to imitation, as it may involve a number of behaviors being adopted, whereas imitation usually involves copying a single behavior. Meditational processes. Bandura believes that humans are active information processors and think about the relationship between their behavior and its consequences. Observational learning could not occur unless cognitive processes were at work. These mental factors mediate in the learning process to determine whether a new response is acquired. Therefore, individuals do not automatically observe the behavior of a model and imitate it. There is some thought prior to imitation, and this consideration is called meditational processes. This occurs between observing the behavior and imitating it or not. This is example of behaviorist model and cognitive model. There are four meditational processes proposed by Bandura. First, the attention. The individual needs to pay attention to the behavior and its consequences and form a mental representation of the behavior. For a behavior to be imitated, it has to grab our attention. We observe many behaviors on a daily basis, and many of these are not noteworthy. Attention is therefore extremely important in whether a behavior influences others imitating it. Second, retention. How will the behavior is remembered? The behavior may be noticed, but it is not always remembered, which obviously prevents imitation. It is important, therefore, that a memory of the behavior is formed to be performed later by the observer. Much of social learning is not immediate, so this process is especially vital in those cases. Even if the behavior is reproduced shortly after seeing it, there needs to be a memory to refer to. Reproduction. This is the ability to perform the behavior that we model has just demonstrated. We see much behavior on a daily basis that we would like to be able to imitate, but that this is not always possible. We are limited by our physical ability, and for that reason, even if we wish to reproduce the behavior, we cannot. This influences our decision whether to try and imitate it or not. Imagine the scenario of a 90-year-old lady who struggles to walk watching dancing on ice. She may appreciate that the skill is a desirable one, but she will not attempt to imitate it because she physically cannot do it. Last is the motivation, the will to perform the behavior. The rewards and punishment that follow a behavior will be considered by the observer. If the perceived rewards outweigh the perceived cost, then the behavior will be more likely to be imitated by the observer. If the vicarious reinforcement is not seen to be important enough to the observer, then they will not imitate the behavior. Conclusions. The social learning approach takes thought processes into account and acknowledges the role that they play in deciding if a behavior is to be imitated or not. As such, social learning theory provides a more comprehensive explanation of human learning by recognizing the role of meditational processes. For example, social learning theory is able to explain many more complex social behavior, such as gender roles and moral behavior, than models of learning based on simple reinforcement. However, although it can explain some quite complex behavior, it cannot adequately account for how we develop a whole range of behavior including thoughts and feelings. We have a lot of cognitive control over our behavior, and just because we have had experience of violence does not mean we have to reproduce such behavior. It is for the reason that Bandura modified his theory and in 1986 renamed his social learning theory, social cognitive theory, as a better description of how we learn from our social experiences. And that's the end of my report. Thank you.